Let's talk how to differentiate effectively using Canvas with lots of different options. We're going to start with the simplest way that you can show your students how to use a tool in Canvas to help them differentiate for themselves, and that is called Immersive Reader. It is built right into the system. You simply tap on it, and students will be able to play the text aloud.
Getting techie with Lit.
What's also awesome is that they can change the speed of it, of course, with the voice settings, but they can also go over here to this reading preferences, and they can choose a language and actually have it translated into that language, right? And read aloud in that language. All you have to do is tap on document, and it changes the document and then hits play. We all know translation's not the only way to differentiate for our ESL students, but it's definitely a way that they can differentiate for themselves. If you are working with any other teachers, like somebody who might be a CCR teacher, you would want to add them to your course by going to People and clicking Add People, and you would simply add a person with their email. Just make sure that you change that person to a teacher so that they are able to work in your course and help the students that they are supporting. We've all heard the term voice and choice. A very simple way of allowing your students to differentiate is by giving them choice in the assignment and also choice in the way that they submit it. Here's an example, a very simple example of a voice and choice assignment with a reading journal activity where students were given 3 different options. And when you look at their submission options, you will see that they had text entry, website URL, or file uploads. Let's just say you have a student that really struggles with writing. You could also add media recordings and allow them just to record their voices and submit that rather than writing. Now let's get into more complex ways to differentiate student work, and that is by creating groups. To create groups, you first have to tap on People, and then you're going to add group sets. Once you create a group set, you're going to need to name it. Once you've named your group set, then you're going to begin adding individual groups. And you're going to need to name those groups, so be careful that you name them something that doesn't call out to the student what you're actually doing here. So you wouldn't want to call it like proficient and emerging. Call it something a little bit more neutral. So you create your groups, how many ever groups you want, and then you begin moving your students and dragging your students into those groups. Once you've created those groups, you would go into the individual assignment in the editing portion of it, and you would go down to where it says this is a group assignment, and this is where you would check that box. And just note that you want to be able to assign grades to each student individually, because this is not necessarily a collaborative assignment, but rather this is just an assignment that you're giving to a specific group of students. One thing to note, if you're going to differentiate assignments, you also need to differentiate the rubrics that you are adding on to those assignments. So just make sure that when you create your rubric, you are creating a rubric for each of the group assignments that is appropriate for the group that you're assigning that to. I do want to point out that if you are using grade sync, differentiation using different assignments and different group sets can get a little bit tricky because grade sync only works with assignments that are assigned to everyone. If you choose to assign an assignment to different students, it's going to go ahead and sync those assignments to all the students. And then you would have to go back and unsync those assignments so that you could excuse the students in PowerSchool who did not need to complete the assignments. So it can just get a little bit tricky, and it's just something for you to be aware of. If you are simply using differentiation in a formative assessment that you are not syncing to PowerSchool, it works perfectly. But just keep in mind that anything that's using grade sync, it has to be assigned to every single person. The only other thing I want to mention very briefly is something called mastery paths. And mastery paths are something that you can see when you're editing an assignment. And you'll see that you have the details tab, and then you have the mastery paths tab. So what you can do is you can actually design assignments that if a student gets a certain score, then they're on to a different assignment, right? So depending on how they do on this assessment, then it takes them to another assessment. Again, mastery paths are great for formative work if you're just trying to figure out where students are and what they need to work on before you get to the actual assessment. But they are not going to grade sync properly. So if you're using mastery paths, just note that that probably needs to be done formatively and not in a way that's going to be grade synced for PowerSchool. This session is not really going to go into mastery paths, but you are welcome to explore that on your own or in the advanced room. So let's start exploring ways that you can use Canvas to help you effectively and efficiently differentiate.